It is graduation time. A lot of people looking for jobs, whether right out of high school or in college, and it depends on where you're going, what you might find available. It's an interesting study from PwC, which is a global watcher of these things. Automated bots could take about 40% of jobs in the U.S. by 2030, one of the findings. Joining us to discuss that and matching young people to the possibility of jobs down the line is Ravi Singh, who calls himself a cross-culture catalyst. He was a cultural diplomat for the U.S. He has an interesting background. If you look, he's grandnephew of Nehru, the first prime minister of India, nephew of Indira Gandhi, who was the only female prime minister, and also was the guitarist for Hanson. So clearly, that's what it takes to become a world leader these days, is that kind of a resume. I'm not sure if we can recreate that, but let's get into it a little bit with Ravi. He is, again, Ravi Singh. He is tweeting at, you can go to the website, raviunites.com. Ravi, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Tim, thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
As I said, kind of an unusual resume. It would be very difficult to duplicate that. That said, the challenge for young people who are graduating now is to get matched with the jobs. And as you have noted, and you have watched very closely, it's very difficult to match people who are educated in our system today for jobs that are, it seems, going in a very different direction from where we have been educating those young people to go to work.
Well, the truth is that we don't really know where those jobs are going to come from or what they're going to be by the time many of our students are into the workplace. So it's hard to, in some ways, it's hard to teach students for an unpredictable future. But in other ways, as I always tell educators, we can predict the future based on how we educate. So it's kind of an interesting opportunity to really think about what kind of a future do we want and how do we want to create it? Because after all, the youth of today are the leaders of tomorrow.
To that point, I was always told when I was in college, I went to a liberal arts school, which, as people will tell you, is not. I had one professor who said it's good for everything in general, but nothing in particular. And so that we don't necessarily treat colleges as trade schools, you should be able to learn how to learn, if nothing else, when you're in college. What are the skills that we're not teaching, you think, that are going to be important to surviving down the road?
Well, you just hit the nail on the head. We have to teach people to learn, and that's the key. Whatever we do, it has to be about lifelong learning. And there's no chance, the Harvard Medical School lab for aging, the director said that the first person to live to 150 has already been born. So if we think about it, how can we in 12, 16, or even 20 years educate someone with all the skills that they need for the rest of their lives? So we have to educate students to be lifelong learners. And actually, I believe in the liberal arts. I think a liberal arts education is exactly what we need to do, because we need to have students who in some ways are generalists, who have a wide array of interests, because that creates pivot points. And to me, and even if you look at my own resume, I've been through aviation, of course, guitar player from Hanson, and served as a cultural diplomat for the U.S. Department of State. I've pivoted a lot, and I believe that pivot and the ability to pivot really is the most important skill that we can teach. And the liberal arts gives us that opportunity because it expands the interests. And if students have a wider array of interests, they have the ability to develop a wider network, which gives them more common blocks to build upon.
I was going to say, can you teach vision, though? I mean, when you talk about coordinating, one of the things about, for example, great leaders typically are able to marshal forces. They don't necessarily have to be experts in any one particular field, but they can grab people and they understand how to make them work together and get them to work together to solve problems, et cetera. Is that something you can actually teach?
Well, I mean, when you say can you teach vision, right? When I think of vision, I think there's a combination. That's an entrepreneurial skill, first of all. And if we're going to teach students to be entrepreneurs, which I think everyone should develop an entrepreneurial mindset, we have to be able to teach them how to fail. And our education system is very achievement-based. We have got a lot of testing and a lot of grading, and we're really encouraging students to achieve. But the classroom is the safest place to fail, and we should be using it. A lot of educators use the acronym for FAIL as the first attempt in learning. And I think that's so true. And kids also naturally have curiosity. So if we have the ability not to extinguish their curiosity and to give them repeated opportunities to fail, stand up, try again, and ultimately succeed, that helps develop vision, because then you're not fearful of failing.
I wonder, again, Ravi Singh is with us, international education speaker. We're talking a bit about the challenges in the next 10 years. You can go to the website if you want, raviunites.com. What is it that, I think about this in terms of things have sort of flipped on their head, and that is that the technology today, the sort of driving force in our culture, is rapidly moving toward the younger segment of the population. It's not the same as the days when you would learn from your elders and you would follow in the footsteps. This kind of establishment argument about those who have come before, and I wonder, is this being reflected in the job market as well? In other words, are more opportunities coming from people other than the established employers and the employment field?
Yeah, I think that's definitely true. We have to have open-mindedness to new ideas and to the new generation. And a lot of my keynote speeches are, one of my keynote speeches is called Millennial Mojo. And it's about getting all of society to recognize some of the magic and the idealism of the millennials. I mean, I believe that's the generation that could ultimately lead us to world peace, because they're so big and they're so idealistic that actually some of it might stick. And there's a lot of good ideas that come from youth. But at the same time, it's a bit of a pendulum swing, because we're also getting away from wisdom. And there's just no shortcut to wisdom. I mean, that only comes from experience. And so I think the youth of today also has to develop an appreciation and a respect for elders and for the wisdom that comes with that. And I really believe that success in the world is the ability to bridge that gap from both a generational standpoint and from a cultural standpoint. I mean, I talk a lot about cultural competence. And for me, culture is not just geographical, but it's also generational. And to have culturally competent students makes them much better prepared to operate in a world that's going towards artificial intelligence and globalization.
Yeah, a little mutual respect wouldn't be too bad a thing, I think, probably in some of this. I wonder.
I mean, the important thing is that I think kids really. One of the things I say is that we don't have to teach people to be culturally competent. We have to unteach them cultural incompetence. And it's because we really are naturally curious and we are naturally willing to learn about each other. But as we get older, some of these stigmas and social influences cause some of those implicit biases. And those biases are really important to overcome.
But there must be some age where that starts. In other words, you can't tell kids who are 5 years old, here's what you need to tell me what you think about the world. I mean, I guess maybe if you want to encourage them, but at some point you have to give them basics, don't you, about how to read, how to write, and all that kind of stuff?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's one of the things that I talk about a lot is that, today's school is trying to be everything to everyone, and it shouldn't be. It really should get back to the basics, because there's still so much value in handwriting. And, there's so many schools in the United States that no longer teach handwriting because they don't have time for it in the curriculum. But handwriting is such an important skill, not for communication, but it's an activity that forces us to slow down our thoughts enough to the point where we start to recognize them. And that's a really key point, because if we start to recognize our own thoughts, we start to become more aware of our own cultural biases and our own views on the world. And, that happens really at a very young age. I mean, a lot of these ideas that we have and biases that we have are probably formed before the age of 5, even if they're not articulated until later in life.
So command of the cursive is important. As we wrap up, and we're just about out of time, I just wanted to ask, the movie The Graduate with Dustin Hoffman, I know it's a cultural reference a lot. Way younger. But this one guy walks over to him at a party and said one word for you: plastics. And that's the key to the future. If you had a word or a course or a skill that you would say that parents should tell their children or young adults who are leaving to go to college, what would you say they should look at?
Cultural competence. It really is about staying curious and learning about each other. So go out there and become culturally competent and get to know everyone and see what we can learn from each other.
There's much more to discover at the website. You can do it at Ravi Unites. Ravi Hutising, thanks for joining us on POTUS today.
Thanks, Tim. I appreciate it.
On the cusp of graduation, you're wondering what is going to happen next in the lives of your children, or if you are a graduate entering a new phase in your life, watch out for that AI. It's going to take about 40% of jobs, so you obviously have to be ready for it. Go to the website, Ravi, RAVI, Unites.com, or you can go to Twitter at Ravi Unites, RAVI, UNITE.